Lastly, there's Staphylococcus aureus, which can produce a toxin and cause vomiting shortly after ingesting. Excuse me. Another thing to talk about with food safety is biotechnology. Is this consumer risk or benefit? So this really is talking about genetically modified foods or GMOs. And so there is positives, there's pros and cons to everything. And so, for example, one of the things that genetically modified seeds have been able to do is it improves the nutrient content. They can increase crop or animal yields, can inhibit spoilage, and enhance food products. There are some concerns, though. For example, when these genes are modified in the food, it may contain allergens or toxins that it didn't before. And then the other really big concern here is it's going to limit biodiversity. And so that's where things like security of our food can come into play. For example, in the early 1900s, the reason why, if anybody ever heard of the potato famine in Ireland, it is because this potato blight came across on a ship and it wiped out all the potatoes in Ireland, which is a staple in that country. And the population is still not recovered over 100 years later from the malnutrition and the death that was caused from this. And so there's concern that, that could happen again if every single corn plant is has the exact same seed, one bacteria or one insect could completely wipe out the entire crop, and we would have no biodiversity. And so there's a potential concern there. Now, this is talking about, in your book, talks about towards a positive nutrition lifestyle. It's called locus of control. And then, so it's your perception. Do you control your life, or do things just happen to you? So somebody who has an internal locus of control feels that they have uh, control over what happens to them. So, um, it's not just like life just happens to me and like I have no choice. They feel like, for example, choosing food choices. They can just say like, oh, oh, we went to McDonald's, so of, of course I had to have, a cheeseburger and fries. Somebody like says stuff like that. That would be an external locus of control. Somebody who has an internal locus of control, maybe for example, planned to eat a healthy lunch, and then everybody went to McDonald's, and so they still were able to find something healthy at McDonald's. And then what this is kind of trying to show you is just about all these different food ingredients. So again, this goes to like food additives. So it's kind of looking at what is this based on the ingredient list. Hopefully you've been able to figure out that it's actually a boost, but it can be pretty hard to figure out here when there's all these different food additives. There's things like, let's see, calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate, sodium ascorbate, soy lectin, what is this? Versus in here, instead, I found a recipe for chocolate milkshake, and these ingredients are you know exactly what's in. Like when I see things like milk, cocoa butter, I can kind of figure out what this item is just based on the ingredient list. Based off this ingredient list, it'd be pretty hard pressed. So what this is trying to show you is ingredients matter. That's why, again, it's so important to read the food label so you can see what are the food additives, especially if you have any sort of allergies. All right, then lastly, what I want to talk to you about is food and medication interactions. So this is why it's very important that you assess all medication intake, which includes herbals, vitamins, amino acids, over-the-counter medication, um, not just prescription drugs. And one of the big reasons is that food can alter drug absorption. So sometimes we need the patient to take food, or excuse me, take the medication on an empty stomach because otherwise the rate of absorption can be altered and possibly slowed down. Um, or other times we encourage patients to take the medication with food. Um, Usually this is going to be to avoid, GI upset or upset stomach. There are some medications that are known to cause gastric irritation, and so these you do want to encourage to take with food or with a glass of milk. Those would be the NSAIDs, which would be the ibuprofen, Advil, some antibiotics, as well as some antidepressants. The next thing is grapefruit juice. So some medications grapefruit juice interferes with. And it ends up making the medication stay in the blood longer and can reach toxic levels. So it's very important to know if your patient can, if they're on medications, if they can drink grapefruit juice or not. A lot of times, on medications, we just say avoid grapefruit juice in general. And it's not that they can't have any grapefruit juice, but we're talking about, a large amount. So it's not that popular, so I usually don't, I'm not too concerned about it, but especially if it specifically has an interaction with grapefruit juice, like for example, calcium channel blockers, you would want to tell your patient to uh, avoid grapefruit juice. Now, one other thing I forgot to say above was, what is an empty stomach? So think about that. If you tell your patient they need to take their medications on an empty stomach, what does that mean? There is a specific definition. It is 1 hour before or 2 hours after meals. Okay, next thing is vitamin K consumption and warfarin or Coumadin, which is vitamin K is actually the antidote to Coumadin, which is a blood or anticoagulant. And so you need to again remember what are foods that are high in vitamin K, especially those green leafy vegetables. Your ATI book also talks about eggs and liver being high in vitamin K. So we want to make sure our patients are aware that they need to take a consistent amount of vitamin K in on a daily basis. So for example, they can't at Thanksgiving have a whole bunch of kale or spinach and then not have any for the next 4 days. And then let's say 2 weeks later they eat, a whole bunch of eggs and then they don't eat anything or, any vitamin K sources for a couple days. They need to have consistent intake. Now, it doesn't mean they have to have spinach every day, but they need to be eating, you either need to be, avoiding vitamin K on a regular basis, or if they like it, they need to consume it on a regular basis because we can then dose their Coumadin off of that and can adjust for that. All right, the next one is tyramine. This is going to be found in especially cheeses, red wines. We find it in some beers, pickled meats, smoked meats. Um, these foods need to be avoided in people who are taking what are called MAO inhibitors, MAOI, excuse me. And what happens is if a person is on an MAOI and then they eat tyramine-rich foods, they can actually go into a hypertensive crisis, which would be a medical emergency. So we need to make sure they understand what foods to avoid that are high in tyramine. Lastly, I want to talk to you about licorice because it's kind of interesting, and this is real licorice. We're not talking about red vines or anything like that. We're talking about real legitimate licorice. This can actually cause your potassium levels to rise, and so we need to, specifically with patients who are on digoxin, some beta blockers, and those spironolactone, which is a potassium sparing diuretic. We need to tell them that consuming excess amounts can actually be dangerous because it can cause hyperkalemia. So these are the important food medication interactions that you will need to know for the exam, as well as the rest of the food safety information that I've discussed today.